The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice has released new information about the targeting of unauthorized immigrants. This includes new details about enforcement around courthouses in Boston. To tell us about the information is the committee's Civil Rights Fellow, Oren Nimni. Thank you very much for being with us, Oren.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Some of this has been reported before, but talk about what's going on around the courthouses.
So what we did was the Lawyers Committee filed a Freedom of Information Act request a couple of months ago and a public records request for the trial courts. And so we got some information from immigration enforcement, and we also got some information from the trial courts. And by looking at both of those sets of information, which includes emails and internal memoranda and also some other exchanges between officials, we found that enforcement at courthouses is expanding and that it's a targeted plan by immigration enforcement, specifically in Massachusetts. It's also happening across the country, but that the plan has expanded a lot. ICE used to go into courthouses very rarely. They used to be kind of sacred places like churches or schools or other places like that because there are governmental interests and people don't want to be scared away from courthouses. So they would only go into courthouses when there were particularly egregious offenders that they wanted to pick up. But now it's across the board and they're going in very regularly.
Of course, the way federal officials described this a few months ago is that it's not really a change of policy. The rules they have to play by are the same. The only thing that's different is that under the previous president, there was this language about the priorities of going after really, really bad people.
It's true that, first of all, there have been some major policy changes that I think we all know. But what is clear is that whether they have to do something different or don't, that they have expanded the program, that the internal documents and the emails between ICE officials clearly show that they have decided that courthouses and courthouse arrests are going to be a new area of fixation and priority for immigration enforcement, and that they're not going to be particularly targeting any sort of offender, that they're going to be picking up people who have minor civil infractions or things like driving with a suspended license, and it kind of runs the gamut between that and more serious crimes.
Tell me about that, Chris. As far as the people that you know who've been picked up already near the courthouses, what kinds of things have they been there for?
It's been a variety of people, and we don't know the specific circumstances of each person, but it's been some victims that are going to the courthouse to report things, some witnesses, and also some people that are there to be arraigned on criminal charges, everything from, like I said, driving with a suspended license and minor other traffic violations like an OUI, a first OUI, or minor drug possession, all the way up to some more serious things like assault and battery. But there's no real picking and choosing going on by ICE. It's just rapid enforcement. And one of the major impacts that we're seeing from this enforcement is that even one instant of enforcement at a courthouse chills the rest of the community, the rest of the immigrant community from coming to that courthouse. If it's a battered woman that wants to go and report her domestic abuser and get a restraining order, or if it's a witness coming in to testify at a trial, or if it's someone coming in for a minor violation that then doesn't come in and gets a default on their record, so that it becomes further and further more difficult for them to disengage themselves from the criminal process.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Oren Nimni from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. Oren, explain a little bit, because there are cases where I think the federal government says, well, if somebody picked up by us has to go back to the courthouse to clear their name, let's say, we'll let them do that.
That is what the federal government has been saying. That's not what's happening in practice. There's no real consistency to what the federal government is doing, other than that they've shifted to targeting courthouses for ICE detainers. We know of 26 different courthouses in the Northeast. 24 of them are in Massachusetts, where ICE is going and actively seeking out people to go and do enforcement activities at the courthouse. And we know the chilling impact that this is having on people going into court to conduct regular business.
What about the policy of the court system around this? I know that they have challenged the federal enforcement. So where do things stand?
So initially, there were some guidelines put out by the trial court, the chief justice out of the trial court, saying, okay, let's hold off on doing immigration enforcement, particularly in courtrooms. Then in July of this year, the Lund decision came down, which basically says that in Massachusetts, officials are not allowed to detain people solely on civil immigration detainers. And both the guidance from the trial courts and the Lund decision have had a deep impact on the way that immigration enforcement can work. in the internal emails that we received from ICE through our Freedom of Information Act request, we saw that this is putting a heavy burden on ICE because they're no longer allowed to use state court personnel and trial court officials to do their work for them. And so they're having to find other ways to do it. And we've also seen from press releases from ICE themselves that this has led to a targeting of Massachusetts for immigration enforcement. During the Safe Cities operation back in late September of this year, ICE was very clear that they targeted sanctuary cities and Massachusetts as the only state in particular because of the Lund decision, because we have these policies, these immigrant-friendly protective policies, and that the Trump administration would like to retaliate against us for that.
Now, I know judges issued decisions saying that they want the federal agents to sort of stand back, but you've got people working in the courthouse, couldn't they decide maybe, to cheat a little bit maybe?
To be honest, we don't know exactly what's happening. From the documents we have and from some anecdotal reports, we know that sometimes court officers will take longer processing someone if they know ICE is on the way, just so that they can hold them there long enough for ICE to actually get there. We know that some court officers have tipped off ICE that there's someone that ICE might be looking for and that they should come and pick them up. We don't know the extent to which this is happening or anything in particular, but we're hoping to get more documents from ICE in the trial courts in the coming months. We are going to follow up on the initial FOIA request that we submitted that this information came from, and we submitted an additional one around Operation Safe Cities.
You mentioned the problem of having a chilling effect on people who want to go to a courthouse on legitimate business, who might not even have an immigration problem. What about that? I mean, can you document that? Is anything you can build on?
I think we can document it in a couple of ways. I think we know that enforcement activities in courthouses make people afraid, particularly people with immigration issues, afraid to go into those courthouses because they're afraid that they'll be picked up. I think we can, talk to the communities around these 26 places where we've seen enforcement and figure out what the chilling impact is. We know that it's there, but we don't know the extent. And I think that's what we should do, going forward is try to really figure out what the impact of this enforcement is, because it doesn't you're right, it doesn't just affect undocumented immigrants. It affects people with a wide variety of immigration statuses and also other people that might have problems with access to justice issues.
Talk about the grapevine effect here too, because I know you have a lot of trouble getting information from public agencies, but on the other hand, word gets around. I mean, what can you say about that?
I mean, we know that word gets around first and foremost in the community. We've heard from individual clients and from people in the immigration advocacy community that this is a problem, and that's sort of why we went and investigated further. We also know that people in the trial courts, judges, trial court officers, ICE agents are also talking to each other about, these decisions, what the impact these decisions are having, and that everyone's kind of having a different reaction. In the fact sheet that we put out, we show that judges in particular are, not big fans of ICE enforcement in their courthouses. Judge Talwani in particular, out of the district court, the federal district court in Massachusetts, said that ICE enforcement, not letting people come into the courthouses to go to their hearings might be an obstruction of justice issue, and that she doesn't want that in her courthouse. And other judges in Massachusetts have also been really wary of ICE enforcement in the courthouse for the reason that I've been talking about, which is that it chills people from getting access to the justice that everyone is due.
I guess it stands to reason that if there is an immigrant who has to go to the courthouse with a problem, even if it's more about being victimized, I guess they should be able to call somebody and say, what do you think? Is this okay for me to go there? Is it safe?
I think that they could call, and that we don't really know what will happen. That the best that people can do is the things that they would normally do to protect themselves, and that having an attorney or calling the lawyers committee is a good first step. But we don't know how ICE is exactly targeting people. But we do know that courthouses are becoming less and less safe places, and that they should be extremely safe places, particularly for victims to go.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Oren Nimni from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. In a moment, the message from protesters to Governor Baker about new fossil fuel projects in Massachusetts.